So ridiculous.
You're ridiculous. And she met me at the college. Her friends play my songs and they been following me. Yeah, I don't like to do that much explaining and talking.
Are you ready for the
Oh.
I hear you like pizza and dance.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I filmed a few videos about computer science with my friend Jenny from Brown, but all of you seem to really enjoy those videos. So today I have a special guest, Peter Gao. If you don't know, I have a brother and he also happens to be a computer scientist and startup founder, and he's gonna answer some questions that you submitted through my Instagram. Peter, without further ado, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your academic background?
Yeah, so I'm Peter. Grew up in the Bay Area, ended up going to Berkeley and doing this degree called EECS, which is Electrical Engineering Computer Science. My focus in school, I was doing a mix of machine learning and sort of like back-end development at a mix of web tech companies. So I interned at Pinterest, I interned at Khan Academy. And then my research in school was focused on deep learning for object detection. And so I took this research, went to this company called Cruise, which builds self-driving cars. I was the 18th employee there, and I built out a large part of the sort of perception, machine learning, deep learning stack there. And then after about 4.5 years leading the teams there, left to take a break, travel for a few months, and then started my own company in January.
What made you want to do CS? Because I remember in high school, you were still deciding if you wanted to be pre-med or do CS or do economics, something like that. So how did you end up landing on computer science?
So I actually still really like biology. And so in college, I actually did end up trying pre-med for a little bit, actually after I finished my EECS degree, but then decided that it wasn't for me. But when I was choosing coming into college what I wanted to do, it ultimately came down to the schools that I got into and what they were good at. So, one school was better at like sort of the pre-med stuff, one school was very good at economics, and then, Berkeley I thought was pretty good at everything. So when I chose Berkeley, I was like, okay, well, I still have to choose something while I figure out what I want to do. And so I was like, well, Berkeley's really good at engineering. So I did undecided engineering and then took some CS classes and was pretty good at that. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to start off with EECS and, try basically pre-med and more of the econ and unrelated interests after I finished my EECS degree in about 2.5 years. Yeah.
There are many fields in computer science, so how did you choose machine learning specifically?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think the first thing that I think I realized is that, in high school I did robotics, and I thought that was really cool, mainly just because it was just really interesting to be able to combine all of the hardware and software pieces together and to start to interact with the physical world. And then in college, I felt like when I was looking at the different options, there's databases, networking, low level, stuff like that. AI and machine learning was definitely the coolest. And I, was definitely drawn to that in one way, but also I felt that if I were to ever get back to robotics in the future, that was going to be the thing that made it really work. And so I wanted to get good at that just in case.
So how do you get into coding with no background? Do you think that you need to go through schooling to get into computer science, or is it something that can be learned through online courses or self-taught?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to get into software engineering or getting into coding. I think it depends on your objectives. If you're trying to learn this as a hobby, or if you're trying to learn this for I need it for research, or some people are I'm trying to switch careers and become a software engineer. I think you can learn coding in a lot of different contexts. I still love Khan Academy's product, and I actually highly recommend the Intro CS curriculum there for anyone who wants to get into web development, who wants to just learn how to code in general. I think there's a lot of great starter courses of how to code out there. I know there's also a lot of boot camps that will get you into it, and we've hired people from them at my previous jobs who have done fairly well at a junior level coming out of those camps. So I think you have to think about what your end goal is and start to target some of your learning that way. I do believe that is something that you can learn yourself, but it does depend a lot on your own capability to like self-learn and keep focused on the objective at the end of the day.
What do you learn in college? For example, what skills or tools should you learn to have a good tech internship slash job?
I think for most computer science majors, the basic intro sequence is already sufficient. So that's usually, for Berkeley, it was like a general software engineering course, data structures, low-level programming, and then discrete math. So that's like 61 ABC and then CS70. So that's pretty good in terms of setting you up for the first sort of internship. But I personally found the most useful thing in college, I helped found this club called Hackers at Berkeley. And in that club, we were just like working on our own personal projects, learning how to do web development, learning a lot of like practical software engineering skills. And that ended up actually being a lot more relevant to the stuff that you do in industry than maybe the things that you'll learn in class.
As a CS major, do you need to be good at math?
So this kind of depends on your definition of what you want out of being a CS major. So a lot of people who work in software and industry don't really need to know that much math at all. A lot of the stuff that you do day to day in industry is not really that hard. But then if you want to be like, for example, like a computer science PhD student, then like, yeah, you really need to know a lot of math, or you have to have like pretty rigorous grounding in theory. So I would say that at least if you want to do well in the advanced classes in a CS course, like, yeah, you need to have like pretty good, like, if not mathematical, at least like algorithmic fundamentals.
Are you a robot?
Not yet. Working on it.
I guess, could you talk more about building your portfolio as a CS student, and I guess like what you took away from each of your internships?
Yeah, so building your portfolio, this goes back to the club that we did. So Hackers at Berkeley was started in the very, very early days of what I think later became the hackathon craze. So back then, hackathons were things that were just kind of casual events where you could get together with friends and work on side projects. And then, like Facebook would hold a hackathon. We had like this thing called the Battle of the Bay hackathon that we held with Stanford. But it was all very like low pressure affairs where you kind of just stay overnight and then come back the next day and, show off what you built. And it was just kind of fun. And you got like silly prizes and stuff like that. So that was actually very helpful for assembling a portfolio of good projects because, you tend to work on some fun stuff, and you also get to work with friends, and you also learn a lot about like just practical software engineering. So I definitely got some good stuff there before it became the sort of like mega hackathon culture that it is now. I think the other thing I took away is in terms of internships. So my first internship was at this startup called, and it actually shut down in the middle of the summer because it ran out of money.
When was
and
this?
This is after my freshman year.
Oh.
So that was kind of awkward because they actually didn't have enough money to pay us for the last 2 weeks that I was working there. That startup was like around 10 people, and that definitely showed. It's like, I did like, some pretty good software engineering work at the beginning of it, but it was also like, oh man, like startups can really mess you up. Like, so that was definitely like a window into like, most startups fail. But, second internship was at Pinterest, and that was much more put together. And so that was like on this team called Black Ops, which was pretty awesome. And so that was basically fighting spam, porn, fraud on Pinterest. And that was an awesome experience. Learned a lot from like a great group of people. Did a mix of, again, like the full stack backend and ML work there. And that was just like, yeah, like early Pinterest, 150 people. That was kind of like my favorite period of like having enough people to get good work done, but also having kind of like a small enough group that you still knew everyone. And then my last internship after my junior year was at this company called Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit that deals with, actually everyone knows Khan Academy,
Yeah,
so I don't have to explain that.
10 of us have been abducted by aliens because they view us as being representative of the human race.
But I was doing data science there. And so the main takeaway I had from that internship was that I didn't want to do data science because I came in thinking it was very similar to what someone in machine learning does. But it turns out that most of the time when you're working on a data science team, it's a mix of doing data engineering, which is, a lot of kind of like piping stuff together, which is all right. It's necessary. And then there's mainly a lot of the data scientists that work in most companies are doing more analytics. So that means like your day-to-day is like running queries, graphing graphs, like, basically writing reports. And so like you're not really working on the core product and you're not really doing that much like interesting modeling work. And so I kind of, took away from that was probably not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be somewhere where the modeling part of machine learning was more core to the focus of the company or the job.
Does the college that you went to matter when you're applying to tech jobs?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
I've heard the opposite.
It really, really matters when you're applying to jobs. It doesn't matter once you get there. So what I mean by that is that most tech companies will recruit only from like a very small select group of schools. And so like that's kind of like, the like Harvard, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley, Stanford, crew of schools tend to get most of the attention from tech companies that want to recruit there. So then if you have like a degree from like one of these really good schools and that are well known in tech, then like you have a much easier time getting in. They have much more understanding of like the curriculum and the quality bar that they expect from graduates coming to that university. Once you get there, then of course, like, your job performance is the only thing that matters unless your credentials. But getting your foot in the door, I think going to a great university really helps.
What would you recommend for people who are trying to get their foot in the door? Because I know there's like a huge screening process that's literally just based off of like keywords and resumes. And I've heard that like a lot of it is just studying, like cracking the coding interview and doing well in your interview. So like, is it that your school matters only to get your foot in the door, but past that, it's just based on like your technical ability?
Yeah, I think my view on, this is more typical for if you're trying to get a job at like FANG or something like that. They have a very like prescribed interview process. And the way that you get through that process is to get yourself to like a phone screen and on-site interview. And the best way to do that, don't apply through the website. Don't necessarily put your resume in through the career fair. The number one best thing you can do is get a referral from one of your friends who either works there or has worked there as an intern and can vouch for you, because resume referrals are typically the thing that people will actually look at every single one. So if you pass that bar, which again, that's the step where like, having a good referral plus like coming from a good school will help. Then once you get to the phone screen and once you get to the on-site interviews, that is purely something that you can study for and you can get really good at. So if you just do cracking the coding interview, if you do leak code up to like, a certain level, like you can pretty deterministically like, pass all of these things if you study hard enough. So.
Do you want to talk about your research experience in undergrad? Was that like a big part of like...
Yeah, so my research experience, basically the story with my undergrad is that I did EECS and I finished up pretty much all the degree requirements in about 2.5 years. I did a semester where I took some liberal arts classes as well as doing pre-med, and then decided that it wasn't for me. And so what I
Did you just take one class?
No, I took bio and OChem, and it just wasn't for me. And then my fourth year, I was like deciding, well, I could just graduate early and go to Pinterest. But then I decided actually, what I could do is I could actually just be like a graduate student at Berkeley. But then, actually like doing graduate school costs tuition. And you have to apply and all that. And I was just like, well, as an undergrad in EECS, I can already take grad classes. So, and I already finished all of my requirements. So why don't I just do my own master's basically? So I signed up to TA, the machine learning class. I signed up for some grad classes in CS. Specifically, it was computer vision and computational graphics and stuff like that. I took some liberal arts classes, and I was basically just a grad student, except I was just DIYing my own master's. And then I was doing research as well. Like my last year doing research, that was working on Cafe. So Cafe, if y'all are not familiar with it, was the deep learning framework before TensorFlow was cool. Before it even existed, actually. And in those early days, like, deep learning got hot in like 2012. And in 2015, people were still trying to figure it out. And so these grad students at Berkeley made this framework called Cafe, and they needed help maintaining it because they were also trying to complete their PhDs at the same time as like thousands and thousands of people are trying to figure out how to use deep learning and specifically Cafe to accomplish their projects. I helped out with that. And then I also worked on a project for doing logo detection with deep learning and learning a lot about computer vision that way. And it was a lot of fun. In retrospect, that knowledge that I got from doing research was actually pivotal because at that point, like very, very few people were knowledgeable about deep learning, but it ended up being very, very important in making these self-driving cars work. So when I went to Cruise, I expected that I was going to be, learning a lot from these computer vision PhDs that they had hired there. But then it turns out that all those PhDs had completed their degrees before deep learning was a thing. So they didn't know that much about it. And so I ended up being the expert and leading the computer vision team there for all this time. And that was a lot based on the stuff that I did in my research. So.
Okay, we're going to pivot now to talking about your startup experience. So first of all, tell us a little more about the company that you started, sort of the process that you went through thus far.
Yeah, so I always kind of knew from a long time ago, I guess, that I wanted to do more small companies. And so when I came out of school, I was deciding between going back to Pinterest, which I had really enjoyed, going to Google X or coming to Cruise. And so at that time when I interviewed, Cruise was 5 people and Pinterest was 500 from the 150 that it had been when I had interned there. And so I thought at that point, man, I love Pinterest, but it's too big. And so I signed the offer with Cruise. By the time I graduated, Cruise was about 18 people. And then at that point, I think working at Cruise definitely gave me a lot of insight into what it's like to be at a small scale startup. And around year 2 or 3, people told me that I should consider becoming a founder at some point, mainly because I think I had the temperament for it. So I knew that was always in the back of my mind for quite a while. And so at the 4-year mark at Cruise, I felt there was kind of a complicated decision-making process there about what I wanted to do next or whether I wanted to stay. But ultimately at the end of that process, I decided that, I think this is probably the right time to go and, start my own company and try being a founder before I have a family and a lot of attachments and a lot of obligations that will distract from that. So I went traveling for a number of months, just took a long break, to recover from Cruise, and then came back in late January and started this company. And so this company is called Aquarium, and what we do is we build tools that make it easier for anyone to build and improve their ML models. And it's largely based on the experiences that I had at Cruise in the early days where we were building out a lot of these very novel deep learning models. And nothing existed at that time, and you had to build a lot of things from scratch because it was just such a new technology. And so we built a lot of things that were able to solve a lot of our common problems. And then we went out and, after 4 years, you see that it's not just people in self-driving that are using deep learning now. It's all these different companies from agriculture to construction to logistics to robot arms. There were so many interesting applications of deep learning out there that people were able to find that were very valuable, but they were all kind of in the same spot that we were in 2015, where they were coming at it for the first time and they were encountering all these pain points and all these problems. And I kind of was well, hey, I already know, how to solve this, at least to the 80% extent, if not to a 95 or 99% extent. And so I want to take some of the stuff that I learned at Cruise and, help out everyone else who was doing deep learning.
I feel like we should talk about how you decided to work at Cruise after you graduated, because I remember that was a huge decision for you, like deciding whether you wanted to work at a riskier startup or work at a more like big established company.
Yeah. And I think at that point, my reasoning was kind of like, well, I'm young, I can take risk. And so like, the worst case scenario if this fails, like, yeah, sure, maybe it'll take up like a year or two of my life, but at least I'll have some interesting stories to show from it. Because at the end of the day, it was kind of like, wow, like self-driving cars are really cool. And like, I had gotten hit by a drunk driver, and that was pretty terrible experience. And so I was definitely very personally motivated by the mission. And the other thing that really changed my mind, or I don't know if it really changed it more than just reinforced it, was that at that point in time, I got the offer. I told them I was thinking about it, and they said, hey, why don't you come by the office and we'll give you a ride in the car. And so I went up to the office because I was local, and they drove me on the freeway and they turned on the Cruise autopilot system and it drove itself. And I remember the COO, Dan Kahn, being like, at some point during the ride, he took out his phone and he sat on it. And I was like, why are you doing that? Like, why are you sitting on your phone? He's like, it's because, it just works. And it's so boring that, sometimes I have this need to like check my phone, but you're not supposed to. So I have to sit on my phone just because it works and it's super boring. And that was the point where like when he turned on that system and the steering wheel started like jerking by itself, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, oh, this is crazy. And then, after like 2 minutes, you're like, okay, this is like boring. And then that was the moment where I was like, oh, like this is the future. The future is boring. And so I decided to sign on.
So you went through a program called YCombinator that I'm sure a lot of people who are viewing this and who are computer science know what it is, but could you just talk about like why you chose to apply and also your tips for getting into the program?
Yeah, YC is pretty awesome program. Cruise actually, it was a YC company. It was YC Winter 14. And I actually found out about Cruise because I was browsing Hacker News while I was at Khan Academy. I saw the job posting for Cruise, self-driving cars, Winter 14, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I was just like always like thinking about it as like kind of like a long shot for a while until it started to become more like a plausible possibility. But so yeah, like, we were a YC company. I'd, known a lot about YC. And so when I was starting my own company, for the first few months, we were just doing it ourselves and working on it ourselves. And then the YC application deadline kind of rolled around. And so at that period of time, I happened to spend some time with Kyle, we were hanging out. And so I asked him about it. I said like, hey, would you do YC? Would you recommend YC for, us? And he said, I've done YC twice for like Justin TV and for Cruise. And if I were doing another company, I would do YC again. And I was like, it's a pretty strong endorsement. So, I definitely respect Kyle a lot. And so I thought that was definitely a strong opinion, and definitely swayed my opinion on it as well. But I think the other thing is that YC is more than just like the specific program itself. It also has like a big community around it. It's also something where, if you are like a YC founder, there's like some branding associated with that you can carry with you for like the rest of your life. But also it gives you access to the community and its resources for the rest of your life. And so we thought that, it was going to definitely help with the success of our company, at least based on Kyle's recommendation. But it was also something where we felt that for us personally, me and my co-founder personally, it was going to be something that was also very helpful for the rest of our lives. So we applied, and in terms of getting into YC, I think the number one thing is just being very clear and articulate. It's very important to be able to clearly communicate ideas with like a minimum of words and complexity.
Oh, someone also asked, like, how did you develop like your pitch?
I developed my pitch from first thinking very hard about it. I was also applying for a research grant at the same time, and that makes you write out like, it was like 50 pages or something at the end of it. And so that, makes you really think about every aspect of your business. And so that helped crystallize the pitch to some extent. But then at the end of the day, when we decided, okay, we're going to apply to YC, we just did 10 practice pitches in a week. And that was the way that we prepared. And that is the best way to practice your pitch, is just to do it repeatedly with people who are either former YC founders or other like VCs or anyone in your network who is good at, crafting that pitch and giving you feedback on it. And so that's how we got it ready for YC. And then, you do your 10 minutes pitch and they called us later saying you got it. We did the first remote batch because that time was when, San Francisco locked down in like March or something. And so when we started in May, they had already decided at that point, okay, we're going to do this fully remotely. And so it was really interesting doing that because like all of us at that time were still trying to figure out how to do anything remotely. How do I work a job remotely? How do I see my friends remotely? And now it's like, how do I start a company remotely? and and that was like definitely a big thing that, we were still trying to figure out. But YC was really good because they had put a lot of thought into how they would organize the whole program. It was actually much easier in certain aspects because normally you're supposed to commute down to Mountain View. And so if you're in SF, it's like a whole deal that takes like multiple hours. But now everything's remote. There's no commute. You just sign in at the appropriate time and you see the talks and have your events and all that, which was, definitely saved a lot of time. Another thing I think is that because it was remote, they were able to allow in a lot of international founders. And it was really interesting meeting people in different time zones, different geographies who were doing things for different markets. So there's some people doing it for LATAM, there's people doing stuff in Europe. And so having that international perspective was really cool. Thing that I didn't expect was that I thought a large part of YC was actually going to be about the direct advising. And so I was initially very skeptical because I knew that back in the day, there was Paul Graham, he was this luminary in the field of startups. And so if you went to YC, you could get direct advising from Paul Graham, and that was going to make your company super successful and stuff like that. But then at that point now, YC has 200 companies per batch, and you get advised by group partners who are not, Paul Graham, because he's retired. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really sure if the quality of the advising is going to be the same. But then you show up at YC and you realize that the value add is not just the advising. It's the entire network and all that. But it's also that they have just an immense amount of software that they have built behind the scenes to make lives easier for their companies. They have deals that partners have offered to the partner companies or to the portfolio companies. They have this database of different companies that have gone through YC with their contact information. They have investor reviews. They have all sorts of an internal forum and stuff like that. And that was all extremely, extremely helpful in terms of running the company.
Anything else you want to talk about in terms of what people should know before getting into starting their own company, or what your day-to-day life is like?
Yeah, I think in terms of startup life, I came from being, at Cruise, a software engineer, a tech lead, a manager at various points in time. And so, my skill set was mainly focused around doing stuff in those realms of execution, technical work, people management. And then when you start a company, what you end up doing is a lot of other things that are not that. So you do a lot of things operations, sales, marketing, recruiting, all these different things that are part of the business that you don't really do when you're at a big company because other people handle that for you, right? And so when you do a startup, you have to just understand that you're going to be doing a lot more than just those things that you might have done in your previous job. And also it's all you, there's no one else to blame. It's just if the company succeeds, if the company fails, it's all because of your own individual effort. And so at a big company, you have all these dependencies, these blockers, whatever, but then at a startup, there's no one else you can blame.
Closing words of advice to the people.
Yeah, I do this. I give this advice to a lot of people in industry, but I do think it kind of applies more broadly, which is that you should think about where you want to be at the end of the day. What is the end game? So, in industry, for example, the most common end games for people are either you go exec, so you're like, some VP at a FANG, or you're a VC, which is definitely its own path, or you're a founder. And those are really like the most common ways that you can, succeed or end up in industry in Silicon Valley. And so if you want to think about what you should do now, you should think about, where do I want to be in the future? Which of those end games most appeals to me? And then try to work backwards from there to do what you need to do right now. And I think this applies equally as well to if you're in academia, okay, do I want to go teach? Do I want to go do research in this field? How do I do the actions in the near term that will get me there? And I think it's probably similar if you're just trying to break into CS. Just think about what your goals are and work backwards from there.
Thank you, Peter, for coming onto my channel. And
check out aquariumlearning.com. We're hiring. Though if you're still junior at this stage, we're probably,
if you're a high schooler, maybe not. But
unless you're really good. If you're an IOI beast or if you're a UCO beast, definitely come talk to us. If you know anyone who's doing some interesting stuff with machine learning and wants to try our stuff out, let us know. If you're interested in working with us, we're hiring. Though we're definitely looking for more senior people right now.
Where can they find you / contact you?
Yeah, you can basically go to aquariumlearning.com and fill out a form there if you're interested in using our tooling. If you want to reach out to me, you can email info@aquariumlearning.com, and then that should go to our mailing list and I can respond there. So yeah.
All right.
Cool.
I'll see you all in the next video. We're going to get some Vietnamese desserts now. Bye. If you feel inspired after watching this video to learn something new, I'd like to point you to Skillshare. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community where you can take courses on all sorts of creative topics. I've personally taken a class by Ali Abdal. He's made a course on Final Cut Pro and video editing basics that I think is super helpful, learning all of those shortcuts to edit videos faster and cleaner. The first 1,000 people to use my link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. So if you've been looking for a quarantine hobby, this would be perfect for you. All right, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Then she met me at the college. Her friends play my songs and they been following me. Yeah, I don't like to do that much explaining and talking.
I know.